All right, welcome to another episode of the Wild Strength Podcast. Today, my guest is Dr. Matt Zanis. His walk-up song is the Immigrant Song by Led Zeppelin. So we're going to get things kicked off with that, get the energy going here, and then we'll get into it. God, yes. Such a good song.
Oh, awesome.
Yes, right when the beat kicks off. Wow, I feel like I should just play the whole song throughout the entire
It's like an homage to my Scandinavian heritage.
Yeah.
Since I'm like a
Yes.
pseudo-Viking.
Oh, I love that so much. All right, like I said, we have Dr. Matt Zanis here, or Matt, however you want to refer to him. Like most people I've had on this podcast so far, I know him through strength and conditioning, through the NSCA, through the human performance field. Matt is the movement expert. If you go and find him on Instagram, Rooted in Movement, you will see what I'm talking about. And he is also a physical therapist for the USA shooting team, which I was kind of talking with him a little bit before this. I've not really ever asked him too much about that, so maybe that's what we get started with. But I'll let you introduce yourself, say as much or as little as you want, and then we'll get into it.
Oh boy, where do we begin? So many stories. Yeah, my name's Dr. Matt. I'm actually from the backwoods of Pennsylvania. So grew up in the coal region, which is kind of super redneck. I kind of grew up on a mountain away from everybody. And I grew up in a very predominant baseball family out there. And yeah, dad was like a collegiate left-handed pitcher. Mom was actually a collegiate sprinter. My brother was a right-handed pitcher. I had some pretty good genetic gifts that were in my family, except I got none of them. None of them whatsoever.
That's how it goes.
Yeah, I was a genetic trash can. But I grew up there, hunting, fishing, doing a lot of shooting sports with my dad and everything like that. And I always had a really good work ethic. I was a hard worker, which really helped me get to where I am today because kind of get like a go against the grain guy. I ask a lot of questions. I don't just like to follow the herd. And I push the limits and push the boundaries on people. And I was like one of those guys who went rogue in high school because I found weight training. That's kind of where this whole story started. Because I grew up in a time period when they thought that weight training was bad for baseball players, which we know now is like couldn't be further from the truth, right?
Sure, yeah.
And like I would get hurt every single year trying to throw more, bat more, sprint more, trying to improve what little genetic potential that I had. Except I just kept getting hurt, kept getting injured, like all kinds of crazy shit, like shoulder issues, knee issues, back problems, feet problems.
Sounds about right, yeah.
And once I found weight training, I was like, well, just screw it. I'm going to go see if I can get stronger. And guess what happened? Like all those little nagging pains and injuries just kind of seemed to melt away, at least in that moment anyway. And I had that light bulb moment right there. Like I am really a much better coach and an athlete and a much better provider than a player. And I was like, okay, well, I'm going to try and take this into a career now. And so went off to the University of Pittsburgh where I got my degree in athletic training. So the guy who ran out in the field when somebody got hurt. I did that for a little while, worked with the Pittsburgh Pirates, so stayed within the baseball realm.
Nice, okay.
And then went to Duke in North Carolina for my doctorate in physical therapy, which was kind of like that nice pivotal moment for me because it really kind of set me on this trajectory with the opportunity to really go like intern anywhere in the country. And one of those places actually happened to be out here at the Arizona Cardinals in Phoenix. And so fell in love with the area. Never wanted to move back to the cold of Pennsylvania. Just like, this is too good.
Yeah.
I got sun all year round. It's gorgeous. People are healthy. They're active. And I knew I had to put down roots here. So 2 weeks after graduating Duke, jumped ship and did a cross country trip out here to Arizona and just never looked back.
Nice.
And it's interesting too, because I started my career in the insurance-based model of physical therapy, which if you don't know, it's fucking terrible.
Yeah.
It's awful.
Very much so.
God, like seeing 4 people an hour, like not really making any meaningful progress with patients, just like kind of checking the box and collecting insurance money.
And hoping they do what you tell them to do.
Hope is an understatement. And I could handle that for about 2 years. That was my limit. And within that second year, like halfway through, I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I can't do this. And so I just completely jumped ship. I had no business plan, nothing whatsoever, but I just put a table in the back of a CrossFit gym and started seeing clients.
Nice.
That's kind of where this all started, which was great because it actually solved the problem that I had, which is time. I didn't have an opportunity to like really go and do anything different. But now that I didn't have a job,
I can do whatever I want.
Had a lot of time. I could do whatever I want. And I was able to spend 60, 90 minutes with my clients, really help them get better. I saw I didn't need to see them in such a large volume or so frequently. But then the most important part is that that freed up my time to go do other things. And it was
Mm-hmm.
really interesting because I do believe that the universe is like giving you and providing you what you need in every specific moment of your life.
Mm-hmm.
And in that same year, I ended up getting a call from an old mentor of mine when I was at Duke. He was in Atlanta, and he did some work with the Olympics back in the like 80s and 90s. See, I told you we get back full circle here. We come back around to that original
Yeah.
intro. And he gave me a random call. It was like I'll never forget. It was like 2 weeks before Christmas, and he's like, "Hey, do you want an opportunity working with some Olympic athletes?" I'm like, "Say less. Who do I need to talk to?"
Count me in. Yeah.
Count me
Give
in,
me the number.
absolutely. And it actually ended up being the USA shooting team. And I was like, this is perfect because
Yeah.
I grew up doing it. I know what their movement patterns are like. I understand trap and skeet and shooting pistols and rifles. And you know, I was a competitive archery shooter in high school as well. And so I understood what they were going through. And the coolest part for me was that it's really sad to say this now, but like our Olympic committee didn't actually consider them athletes, which was mind boggling. I'm like, not only did they have to do this like immense hand-eye coordination, but they are actually moving their bodies in very specific patterns or having to hold sustained positions for very, very long times. They are athletes, true, you know, through and through. And so I was like, I'm going to make a difference on these people. And within about 3 months, we had the injury reduction risk down by 80%, which was awesome. And I was actually just starting with the feet.
Wow.
Low key foot fetish. That's where actually I start all my assessments with because it's like the only connection point without the ground. It gives me all this information that I need to really start to really make some progress with them. But yeah, so the shooting team has been my main focus, and that kind of shifted really niche down into really honing in, just working with shooting athletes of all different disciplines, including like sporting clays, a lot of the sport pistol stuff now out here in Arizona, and then a lot of the tactical professions. So police, military, SWAT, all that type of stuff as well.
Nice. So that's super cool. You kind of mentioned growing up you were shooting a lot. Was that I know you shoot a bow, like you're into archery. Did you shoot every sort of firearm? Was it just through hunting? Did you do it for fun? Like what did that look like?
A little bit of everything,
Yeah.
yeah. Like any teenage boy, I was into getting into a lot of mischief, and this is where I got really good at shooting a bow was because my bedroom. I lived on a mountain, remember? So I was like in this
Mhm.
all
Yeah.
cedar and stone home, and my bedroom window opened up to like an embankment that was maybe 30, 40 yards away from the window. And as a kid, when I started shooting a bow, I would open up that window and shoot anything
Yeah.
that walked by, meaning
Okay.
squirrels, rabbits, birds,
Yeah.
groundhogs, you name it. I would pin it to
Nice.
the embankment, and then ultimately would have to go in there and like finish it off with a 22 or something. But I know that sounds terrible, but I was a child. Okay,
Hey, we've probably all been there.
yeah. But I mean, I look back at it now. It's like it got me really good at being accurate at that distance, and it was a lot of reps that I was getting in, right? And so archery ended up being like my main one. It still is today. I love shooting a bow, and I
Hmm.
prefer hunting that way as well. It's more of a game to me. It's more strategy, kind of like
Yeah.
chess versus checkers,
Hmm.
which I know you full well because you do the same thing.
Yep.
I think you actually get out a lot more than I do now. I'm super jealous and
Yeah.
envious of you with that.
I try
Um,
to.
I'm like, where's Whitney at now?
Yeah.
Colorado for elk?
What is she
Damn it!
doing? I have an
How do
Arizona
I
tag
get?
actually. I'm going to be in
You
Arizona in
do?
January. Yeah.
Oh hell yeah! So I'll
Yeah.
be here for most of January, so we should get
Okay.
together then for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll let you know.
Um, yeah, absolutely. Because I even have like a 30-yard backyard, so I'll get reps in there. Funny story about that. I have one of those like really nice, 3D targets, like
Mhm.
the square ones that's rated to handle a crossbow. And
Okay.
I was practicing the very first time I brought it back home, and I was practicing in the yard, and I put the bag like right up against my cinder block fence wall,
Hmm.
and I'm shooting, shooting. Next thing you know, I hear this like this loud thud, like right into the cinder block. Sure enough, I had poked all the way through the target and into the cinder block wall. I'm like 70-pound draw weight, shooting 400 grain arrows. I guess I'm putting some type of velocity on this thing and just
Yeah.
totally
Yikes.
destroyed that target. But yeah, so listen, I'll go off on so many tangents, but getting back to that original question, yeah, my dad was a part of a gun club, and so
Okay.
he would have me out there on the weekends. I was in the Boy Scouts, and we did all that, like
Mhm.
learning how to shoot and the safety behind it and everything like that. And so did a lot of trap and skeet. with him. And the funny part is he was a lefty, remember? And so I learned on
Two
lefty
lefties.
firearms. Yeah,
Yeah.
I had to. I didn't have a choice. And so
Okay.
everything was
Are
backwards
you
for me.
left-handed?
Fuck no.
Okay. Okay.
Listen, okay, so I tried. I was a baseball player, right? And
Yeah.
so I'm 6'1". I have a 6'5" wingspan. So my dad noticed this from an early age and tried to turn me into a lefty and have me be a first baseman because of the ability to stretch and as a left-handed thrower. And I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. I could like decent like swing kind of a little bit with the bat lefty, but no, the other. I'm not ambidextrous by any means. But it was a lot of fun, and like my grandfathers all collected old firearms and everything like that too, and so I had
Nice.
a
Yeah.
lot of exposure to so many different guns growing up, and it was just fun for us to get out there and like target practice and whatnot.
Yeah, no, that's
Yeah.
exciting. Yeah, I am right-handed, but I only shoot left-handed because I'm left eye dominant. And
There it is.
yep, I grew up shooting like handguns, rifles, like right-handed all my life and was never great at it, but I just did it because I enjoyed it and was like,
Mm-hmm.
man, like it's not my career. I'm not competing. Like it's just fun. I'm doing it. But the
Yeah.
second I switched to shooting, well, so I started shooting my bow with the left hand. And I remember when I first got one, I was in the shop and I was like, just I don't know if this means anything, but I'm left eye dominant. And I knew that through a group that I had worked with previously.
Mm-hmm.
And because I remember we were doing like some training, like stress drills with them, and we were just shooting like fake handguns. And they're like, Whitney, you look like you're reaching to look down the barrel. You should
Mm-hmm.
probably test your eye dominance. And sure enough, we did. And I'm like, oh my God, I've been doing it wrong all my life. But
And
yeah,
now
when
look
I
how
went
much more accurate I can be now.
Oh no, it's crazy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my God, it changes things. So then, yeah, when I was looking for bows the first time, and I was shooting right-handed ones, and I was like, I don't know. I know with it being a shooting sport, eye dominance
Mm-hmm.
probably matters. Like I'm left eye
Just a
dominant.
little bit.
Yeah, just a little bit. And then everyone in the shop was like, "Yep, you need a left-handed bow."
Yes.
And so yeah, everyone thinks I'm crazy because I'm right-handed, but I shoot left-handed. But that's the only thing I can do
Well,
on my left side.
we actually see this a lot more in females. So I
Yeah.
think now don't quote me on this, but I think the percentage is like 35% of females are like
Oh.
opposites, so like either right hand dominant, left eye dominant, or vice versa. And in the shotgun sports, we see this a lot, and exactly what you just mentioned right there is like they would mount the gun as a right-handed, but if they're left eye dominant, you'd see like this head tilting thing to try and get
Yeah.
the eye over the bead. And you're like,
Yeah.
bro, that's not right.
Yeah, yeah. Or
I
you're like
think
really
we need to change
stretching your like neck to get around it.
craning everything over. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you have to pick up on those things. Otherwise, you're in for a. It's doable. I mean, especially with the shotgun because you're not closing one eye.
Mhm.
You can get away with it for a little bit, but it'll eventually start to cause a lot of like neck and shoulder issues over
Yeah.
time too.
So I'm curious,
Yeah.
I like because I'm so left eye dominant and I don't
Mm-hmm.
know your knowledge in the eye dominant stuff, but I cannot shoot with my right eye open, with both eyes open. Like I have to close an eye, and everyone's like, "Oh, you should probably practice with both your eyes open." And I just
Well,
can't even see through my sight if I do that.
yeah. So that can be changed. Like anything else,
Okay.
the body will
Sure, for
adapt
sure.
if you impart the right training stimulus. And so what we do with our shooting athletes is they obviously have to wear glasses, right?
Mhm.
So part of that whole safety thing, but we'll cover it up with like tape on one
Okay.
eye.
Yeah.
So you blur it out, but you still have both eyes open. That makes sense.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so you can begin to train it like that, and eventually the brain will normalize that, and you'll be able to shoot with both eyes open again. And some of them, it's just what you end up doing is like you cover the whole lens, and then you start narrowing it down to like maybe like the size of your pinky. So it's just like
Okay.
there's a little bit of the
Yep.
vision that's obscured. But like with the shotgun, anyway, when you're going after a clay target like that, like you're not really looking at the bead. You're not really focusing on the near part of it. You're looking
Mhm.
peripherally and out. And
Yeah.
so you're trying to train your eyes to focus on that far away vision to see the target more clear than the actual bead of it. And
So you
so it's
probably need both
good.
eyes for that.
Yeah, you're closing one eye. You're taking a whole side of your peripheral vision away, which doesn't make it that much of an efficient movement then because the less field of vision you can see, the worse off, like the slower you're
Yeah.
going to be.
Okay.
Because especially like with these skeet targets, the crossing ones, when they're kind of going from a high house and a low house, you have to
Mhm.
get both of those targets in under 1.7 seconds at the international level. So everything is
Wow.
happening super, super quick.
Yeah.
And so the minute you pull the trigger at the first target, like you already have to see the second target going to be able to get to it in time. So if you got one
Yeah.
eye closed, you're pretty screwed.
Yeah. I know I've wanted to get into like bird hunting for a while now, and I'm like, I just need to go
Mm,
skeet shooting first. Like same thing before I got into bow hunting. I shot my bow for
yeah,
2 years just at targets. I wanted to be like decent at it.
yeah.
And so I'm like, I need to go skeet shooting. But I am aware of that. I'm like, I need to shoot with both eyes. I'm significantly losing, yeah, literally half of my field of
Mm-hmm.
vision when I can only shoot with one eye. So that's something, yeah, I should probably. I've seen like archers shoot with like a patch on their eye.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting. I guess it made sense as you kind of said, like making that patch or covering it up a little bit smaller as time goes on. But does the
Yeah.
body not think that that's the same as having your eyes closed or that eye
Well,
closed?
it's like a constraint-based movement therapy. So
Mm.
the best analogy I can make with this is like, this is coming back from like my old school PT days, my standard of care PT days, when I actually like worked
Mm.
with stroke patients and everything like that.
Oh, yeah,
You would
true.
you would I'm so far removed from that, so please do not ask me any questions on, on that type of
I'm
stuff.
just gonna mention
Um,
it and we'll leave it
sports
there.
sports and orthopedics only, please. But we do what's called constraint-based therapy, where if they had a stroke in the left side of the brain, it would affect the right side of the body. And
Hmm.
so you would end up constraining the quote unquote good side. You'd put like
Hmm.
oven mitts on it and stuff like that so that you couldn't use it because that would be the dominant side. And so your brain would have to rewire and only use that side. And so the same thing can happen here when you cover up that eye. Now you're still allowing the eye muscles to work, even though they can't really see because they're not working to keep the eye shut, right?
Mm.
So they're open, and you still have all of your muscles around the eye. There's six of them that can still track, right? Because remember, it's not totally blocked; it's just
Yep.
blurry from the tape.
Okay.
It's like a clear tape,
Yep.
not like a solid duct tape or anything
Okay.
like
Yeah.
that.
Okay. That makes
It's
sense.
just like a yeah. So it's just like a blur, just to blur out the vision a little bit, but then you can still kind of see. And so
Mm.
over time, it'll train the vision that way. That's actually a fantastic question. I've never been asked that before. That's
Yeah,
good.
it's super. I spent a little bit of time working in the human performance lab at the Air Force Academy here in Colorado
Okay.
Springs. And Diana Bollinger, I'm not sure if you're familiar with her. She does a lot with vision training. And so
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I was kind
Mm-hmm.
of exposed to that before I had got into shooting as often as I was. So I know there's so many different things you can do. I just have
Yeah.
never really looked into the intricacies of it, but it's
Well,
such a
I
cool aspect of training.
it's fascinating for me because, like, I told you a little bit of my background about using the feet as my starting point for
Mhm.
assessment, and it's because nobody was doing it at the
Mhm.
time, right? But it had such a profound impact, like such a large ROI with just a minimal amount of
Mhm.
investment into fixing the feet. You see all these upstream effects from it. And it's really
Mhm.
the same thing with the eyes. Not a lot of people are training it, and actually, what we're seeing now with kids these days, because they spend so much time like in front of computer screens or on the phones that are like distance vision is essentially devolving. Like they're not using it, and we're having a problem now with like these younger kids that are trying to get into shooting sports, like with shotgun and everything. It's
Mhm.
they literally can't see past like the 4 feet in front of their face, and so it's really
Wow.
simple to train it. Right, it's spending time and getting reps in, looking at stuff like far away. And so like here in Phoenix, like I'm looking out my window right now, and I have the view of a beautiful mountain out in the
Mhm.
background, but that's far away, right? And so throughout the day, I will actually purposely and intentionally look out there at that mountain, especially if I'm on
Mhm.
calls all day long, just to give my eyes another field of vision to something to focus on that's farther away.
Mhm.
And so that's one of the ways to
That's
improve eye
interesting.
health as well, to reduce a lot of
Yeah.
the strain around the eye and to actually improve the vision too. It's that simple. You just have to
No,
do it,
yeah, that makes
right?
and it's like with anything else, and like if you can only adapt if you're exposing to different things, and like you said, kids these days are just watching their TV or playing games or on their phones all the time, and if they're not
Yep.
looking at things that are farther away than that really ever, then all they can see is what's right
Mm-hmm.
in front of them, and that never
Yeah.
crossed my mind, but it makes total sense.
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah, and it's really sad too because you're starting to see a lot of the removal of the different like shooting sports from like high schools and stuff right now, like they're not
Mm-hmm.
being funded and
Yeah.
everything. And I try to encourage so many kids to get into this because actually a really fast way to get yourself to an Olympic level athlete because
Yeah.
not a lot of people are doing it,
Yeah.
and like you can get really good at it pretty quickly as long as you put the time. It's a little bit different than say something
It's
like
definitely a
trying to become a
repetition
professional
sport
baseball
for
player.
sure.
Yeah, it's all repetition, 100% repetition. And
Yeah.
you there's to an extent, like you can only put so much lead down range before you actually have to work on like the process and the skill and the technique of it. But
Mhm.
yeah, so just getting good at like and getting comfortable with putting that much lead down range is a great starting point. right? And then you start to train the body into becoming more mechanically efficient. And you can put yourself at a pretty high level. Like we have guys and girls that are like 16 to 18 years old, like going to their first Olympics, right? It's pretty cool.
Wow.
It's kind of like, yeah,
Yeah.
you can, especially if you start at such an early age,
That's awesome.
make some
And
progress quickly.
so what and kind of maybe on the topic of division training and stuff like that, but what
Yeah.
does training for a precision Olympic level shooter look like?
Oh boy. So from a technique standpoint with the sports skill or like what I do with
Take it
them?
wherever you want to do.
Okay.
What you do too. Like what is like your involvement in that? And then like kind
Okay.
of maybe what you know about what they do outside of that
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I do work with a number of athletes that are very process oriented. One of them
Mm-hmm.
is Vincent Hancock. He's our three-time gold medalist in ski. He's arguably the greatest shotgun shooter of all time.
Mm-hmm.
I believe he was 16 when he went to his first Olympics
Wow, yeah.
in
That's
London.
crazy.
And anyway, so he's very, very process oriented and has essentially broken down the sport so much, and he has a very specific way of teaching it and the technique, and it's like turned it into a repeatable process, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so from that standpoint, what you see is there's a lot of like I said, a lot of athletes go out and just kind of shoot to shoot, but they're not really training anything. Like, yeah, you'll go like, oh, okay, I'm going to train station 2 today, or I'm going to train station 6 today, but they don't quite understand like how to gamify it. Like you can
Okay.
work on your hold points, you can work on your break points, but how's the body moving? Right. And so how are you setting yourself up? Which way are your feet facing? Like it's breaking down into the nitty gritty detail. Like, are you using your lower body to move the gun, or are you very handsy and you're using the upper body in the trunk? So that in and of itself is like the sport specific skill of it. And Vinny has done a really great job breaking that down. And then where I come in is, my superpower is pattern recognition. So I'm really good at watching people move and figuring out those like little itty bitty limiting factors or nuances that might be the source of the pain or are limiting them from achieving their full athletic potential. And like if I can get some of these athletes just to improve like a half or a full percentage point, like that's the difference between either not making a final, or
Yeah.
making the podium or not making the podium in a final. Like it comes down to one or two targets sometimes, and a lot of it comes down to how efficiently are you moving the gun, how well can you manage the stress of a situation like that. And so I look at it from, globally speaking, that a lot of the training that I put these men and women through is really all about stress inoculation. Like, how can you do something very, very difficult in a controlled environment to bolster your ability to be more resilient in a stressful situation out on a range, especially at an international level when you've got like camera crews and people are watching you, and you've got some other really high level athletes out there. Like, it starts to take an impact on your
Yeah.
thought process and your mental game as well. So I like
And
to
your
use the
vision.
physical and the vision,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely. And the
Yeah.
nutrition is a whole other side of it.
Okay. Yeah. Oh God.
Got some stories there too. But like where I really, really like to work with these athletes is break them down, put them through a whole entire movement assessment, see where they're lacking from an efficiency standpoint, and then use that with the knowledge that I have about the other disciplines and the technique to build a training program to help them improve those component parts of the sport itself, right? And so the way I look at this, it's kind of like the chunking method of education. Like we learn letters to make words, words make sentences, sentences
Mm-hmm.
make paragraphs, paragraphs tell stories. Our
Mm-hmm.
movement is really the same thing, right? I just break it
Yeah.
down into those little component parts and give you the tools to rebuild from those component parts to tell your own story. What's your movement story? Because the way
Mm-hmm.
I move is gonna be different than the way you move, Whitney. Like we're two totally different size individuals,
Very
and
much
like
so. Yes.
different very different anthropometrics and limb lengths, and
Yeah.
our nervous system is wired differently as well. We had different upbringings. The movement patterns that I trained as a kid are different from yours. We have different perceptions and belief systems around pain, so it all impacts that movement story. And so the training that I give them and I develop for them is unique to their own bodies, unique to their own individual characteristics, to help them learn how to use their body in a more efficient and economical way, so that yes, they can be more skilled at the sport that they're performing in, but then also to make their movement more economical, so they don't break down as easily, right? Because that honestly, that's one of the biggest reasons why these shooting athletes will miss a target here or there, is because like the stress load of having to hold that shotgun up, for example, it's only 8.5 pounds, but over 250 targets in a competition,
That gets
that
huge.
takes a toll. It
Yeah.
takes a toll, and so like that's the biggest limiting factor we see with men versus women in this is, inherently women are just not as strong in the upper body as men are, and
Yeah.
so the men can get away with it for a little bit longer. But that's where like my demographic has shifted now. I'm like 70% female in the shooting athlete world because of just giving them the tools to make their upper body stronger and more resilient to be able to handle the
Mhm.
shotgun. Now all of a sudden you see them like just destroying people out there. Because I will say this, women are naturally a better shot than men
I've heard
across
that.
the board. They
I've
are.
heard that. Yeah.
And so if like you can train that and give them the tools of a solid foundation, they can crush
Hmm.
people, including many, many men. I've had my ass kicked by many of my shooting athletes, or female shooting athletes before.
Yeah.
And I don't even care. It's okay. I can accept that.
No, that's funny. Yeah, and I talk about like as a coach, like most people, and obviously you're working with Olympic level athletes, but like most people don't need super database scientific high level programs. But I think when you look into that, like even someone who's maybe like I used to compete in powerlifting, and so like when you've done that for years and years, you get to a point where like even just adding 5 pounds to your max lift becomes really hard, and that's where someone like you can come in and assess the movement. Like maybe I have, but like for someone else maybe they've never had their movement assessed, and like what can you do different in your squat pattern or whatever pattern in your shooting pattern, to make it more efficient. And I think efficiency is what a lot of people don't think about, and it's I think the biggest key and being better at anything, right? Like if you can
Absolutely.
be more efficient, you can do it for longer. You can get stronger in a more efficient pattern. You can usually take a lot more load in that. And then when you talk about the stress component of it, like I'm a huge nerd on stress. That's like what my research is in. And so like even when you're moving more efficiently, like say you might be stressed and naturally your movement pattern is going to maybe break down a little bit, or like your heart rate starts to go up, which is a whole nother story in shooting sports. You have to be able to control your heart rate in shooting.
It's one of the biggest components of it. Yeah.
Yes, the biggest, yeah, probably
Yep.
the biggest.
Yep.
But when you're moving more efficiently, you have less impact from that. You're still going to
Right.
have the impact of the stress, right? But it's definitely going to reduce that impact. And I think so few people recognize that.
And that's really why I think we're both strength conditioning coaches, and I think
Yeah,
that
I agree.
our like discipline of strength conditioning should really be called movement strength conditioning, and in that
Mm-hmm.
order as well, because
Yeah.
strength and conditioning are obviously measurable components of
Mm-hmm.
somebody's health and fitness, right? And however you want to measure that's totally cool. Like how much weight you could squat or what your 40 time is, like that type of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, like you just described, what's the rate limiting factor here? It's how well you move. And if you never take the time to really break that down, you're
Mm-hmm.
gonna reach a breaking point, a plateau at some point. And like, listen, I am all about people getting stronger. Absolutely. Wasn't it Mark Rippetoe says stronger people are harder to kill? It's true.
Yes.
Like,
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
once again, there is a rate limiting factor there as well. What's the rate of
Yeah.
diminishing returns there, and how strong is strong enough? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Powerlifting, by all means, that is the measurable component of that sport. You have to
Mm-hmm.
be able to lift the most amount of weight possible to succeed.
Mm-hmm.
That's a totally different story than strength conditioning for a shooting athlete, strength conditioning
Oh,
for a soccer
absolutely.
player, strength conditioning
Mm-hmm.
for a baseball player. I'll tell you right now, from example with the shooting sports, there are a couple of international athletes that I know of that like to weight train and have literally built themselves into a movement prison and become so muscle bound that they can't move efficiently anymore. They're not elastic, right? They can't
Mm-hmm.
use that innate energetic recoil or spiraling or coiling patterns in the body to move the gun efficiently. And you know where that shows up the most? In a final. You brought up stress. What happens when we get stressed out? Shit tightens down even more, right? Your
Mm-hmm.
muscles become even more tonic, more contracted, and now your movement's even jerkier, or maybe you hesitate because
Mm-hmm.
it's not relaxed enough to be smooth, if that makes sense, which is going to
Yeah.
then impact the heart rate and everything like that. Because then you start telling yourself the stories of like, why am I not moving the same way I did in the competition? I've literally have watched, and I won't say his name, but he's a French shooter, and in the Tokyo Olympics in 21, he shot a 124 out of 125, like missed one target and was the
Mm-hmm.
first one out of the final
Wow.
because he was one of those guys that was just so inefficient with his movement because he's so
Yeah.
muscle bound. Like you can see it and you know what's going to happen because he just can't manage that stress load and his body can't respond appropriately. And that's the
Yeah.
type of stuff that I like to look at and like break down. Like that stuff fascinates me so much because really
Yeah.
that's what it comes down to. that's what's going to be that little difference that makes you either a gold medalist at the Olympic Games or the first one out of a final and nobody hears about you.
Yeah,
Right.
that's interesting because that kind of makes me think on the topic of, like you said, a lot of these shooters can be in the Olympics by like 16, 17 years old if they're starting like relatively younger. Kind of on the topic of like the long term athletic development, like youth training, youth sports, and like being so specific at a young age. Because I've had it, and I'm sure multiple people, and you have even had like similar experience with similar athletes. There was a guy that was in a unit that I was working with, and he was a collegiate baseball player. He tried to go pro. Pro ball didn't really work out for him, so enters into the military. And he like moved very well, and you could tell, like, just watching him do different things in the weight room, you could tell he was a baseball player. Like just those kids who played it all their life, you can just pick them out.
What's that supposed to mean, Whitney?
Yeah,
I
I'm
feel
just
called
saying.
out right now.
Yeah. They stick out like sore thumbs usually. But like you, like one of the coaches I was working with, he was really big on like his movement assessment when guys first came to the unit included an overhead squat, and his overhead squat was terrible. And I get it, like that's part of like in the research, a lot of people use that as a movement assessment. But like that coach wanted to do everything in his power to have this specific person have the perfect overhead squat when his movement was very efficient in everything that he was doing because his body had just kind of adapted to these things over time. But that coach thought that the overhead squat was the end all be all. And if he didn't have a good overhead squat, then he wasn't good at anything else. Whereas this athlete has become very good at moving and what's most efficient for him and different things. And he was very strong, like you said, and even changing like something like his mobility or whatever would make him lose strength. And obviously he would initially, right, he could get that strength back. And so that was one thing that he would always fight back about too, was like, oh, like I'm strong enough. And if you like, and he kind of understood it too, like being in sports and having strength coaches, he was like, and if I am like more mobile here, then I'm going to lose strength here. And I'm like, that's just how it works. That's
Well,
it. But you have to understand what you're willing to, like, what's the trade-off? What do you want to be better at?
it's a cost benefit analysis. Like
Yeah.
if you work towards one goal, there's going to be a degradation in another one. It's as simple as like, trying to train max strength and then also be a marathon runner at the same time. You're going to be pretty fucking
Nice.
terrible at both.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Although I think I just saw a video of this one guy that like he deadlifted 500 pounds and then ran like a 5-minute mile or something like that. It was the weirdest thing ever.
Whoa.
I don't know. Of course, it's stuff that pops up on my Instagram.
Yeah.
It's pretty weird. But yeah, no, you're right. It's a cost benefit thing, and you bring up assessments like that. It's like, okay, is an overhead squat the end all be all in assessment? No, we can.
Yeah.
I think we can all agree on that. And actually, like when I was at Duke, Greg Cook, who developed the functional movements that's part of, he was really good friends with one of our professors. So I was lucky enough to be there when he was like first starting this thing.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Like we got to be test subjects and learn about it from like the initial infancy phase of it. And then of course now all the research comes out and it's like, oh, well, it's actually no more predictive than a coin flip. Like, okay, great. It doesn't mean that it's useless. There's still utility there, but what are you looking at, right? Do I need to make somebody have a great overhead squat to be a good athlete and to be resistant to injury? No. But what does it give us? All right, so it may give you an ability of, let's just say, compressive strength through the hip flexors. Because you can't compress through the hip flexors and maintain an upright torso, you're not going to be able to do that very well. Ankle range of motion, upper back range of motion, thoracic extension. You don't have good thoracic extension, you can't take your arms up overhead. Are you shifting one way or the other? It might give you an idea like, okay, well, baseball player, right? I was very, very good at turning left. I was like Zoolander. I couldn't turn right. Okay, I could rotate to the left all day long. And that caused some problems. I would naturally drift to the left when I squatted, right? That was my strong side. Right? I couldn't rotate back, so that means I couldn't get my right arm as far overhead. Ironically enough, that's where I had a shoulder surgery way back in the day, right? So all this stuff kind of plays out that way, but it gives us information then. Okay, well, we know that context is key. Okay, they were a baseball player. If they're right-handed, they're likely pretty good at turning left, and so it gives you evidence then as to like what you're seeing on assessment. Okay, because ultimately, when I do these movement assessments on these athletes, I tell them straight up from the very, very beginning, like, I am going to break your ass down. It's going to feel terrible. Like it's going to feel like I'm picking you apart just for the sake of picking you apart, but it's all out of love, number one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
And then also it's just information, right?
Mm-hmm.
We can use the context of your history to give us evidence as to how your body has been moving, and your body's smart. Like it's figured out the best way that it knows how to make you as efficient as it knows how right now. And so that's great. So you're
Mm-hmm.
already strong in these patterns. I don't want to take you out of those, but let's just work on the stuff that you're not good at. Like which joint range of motion you're not good at going into. What kind of motor control patterns or muscle synergy firing patterns are you not good at moving into? And let's work on those in the gym to balance you out. And that's really all that it comes down to, because my skeet shooters are really the same way. If you're
Mm-hmm.
right-handed, you're really good at turning left, but then you also have to turn back during reverse
Yeah.
pairs and stuff like that. So if you're not good at it, we have to train that stuff,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so a lot of these guys and girls, like I said, they're not good at using their legs. They will use their hands and their arms and their upper body for everything. So we have to do things in the gym. Like one of my favorites is taking them into a Bulgarian split squat pattern, but then once again providing constraints around
Mm-hmm.
it, right? And this is what I love about like the strength conditioning field. There's no magic movement
No,
that's going to fix your
there's not.
problems. It's
Yeah.
really just about your intention and your purpose behind
Mm-hmm.
it that matters. And so something as simple as a Bulgarian split squat, which everybody is familiar with at this point,
And everybody
okay?
hates.
And everybody hates. I don't know anybody that likes it. If you do, you're fucking crazy. And we need to have a psychological eval on you for
Yeah,
sure.
let's talk, please.
But for example, like if you're not good at maintaining a soft knee bend to actually use your ankles and your hips to move the gun, I'll use that and we'll put you into a Bulgarian split squat pattern. And then I'll do things like, okay, let's maybe take a weight to the outside and maybe turn over that lead leg. Or my favorite is like, do you even know what a soft knee bend feels like? Because
Mm-hmm.
clearly you can't replicate it out in the range. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So, and listen, I've watched Vinny coach athletes on this, and he would give every single cue that he would know how to get them into these postures and these positions, and the kids just still couldn't do it. Right. And that was because their bodies just had no awareness of it. There was no capacity there. And so that's kind of where we marry these things together with the movement and the strength conditioning and the sport specific skill side of things. Is okay, they got no awareness of soft knee bend. Let's put them in a Bulgarian split squat. Let's teach them, okay, what does that feel like? So this one kid, for example, would drop all the way down, so he had no eccentric control over it whatsoever. And then when he would stand up, his knee would just go straight back into hyperextension. So he would just like drop into like these end ranges and had no control over the middle. And so, all right, cool. Well, let's do this in front of a mirror then. Let's watch yourself do it. And you stop yourself where I want you to stop, at that soft knee bend. That would kind of replicate the same angle when you're shooting your gun. Okay. All right, cool. We know what that looks like. Now close your eyes. Can you replicate it without seeing it? Yes or no? All right, so now we're getting the brain involved, and we're already starting to bridge that gap between the somatic or the body and then the neurological patterning of it. And that's where we really start to see the progress being made, because like you can't just go through the motions. Like I can give him a Bulgarian split squat in a program, but if he's just going to do this drop down, stand up, hyperextend the knee type of thing, what good is that doing?
What's it doing? Yeah, no,
Nothing,
I think it's good.
Nothing. It's changing the intention behind it, right? I don't need to load him up, because guess what? This 19-year-old kid, he was sore for 3 days after doing bodyweight Bulgarian split squats with his eyes closed. Like,
I believe it.
But it was effective enough after a few weeks of training it. I think it was like 3 or 4 weeks. We didn't put any weight in his hands, and then he was able to go out into the gym and perform well. That's the goal, right? The goal isn't loading up and see how much weight you can move with it. It's really what I look at this as is how well do you feel? How good do you look? Because of course we all like to look better naked, and the aesthetic component is part of this. And then how well are you performing?
Yeah.
Look, feel, and perform. That's what it comes down to. And if you're doing all three of those, then we're making progress in the right direction. We don't need to change anything, right?
Yeah. The cueing thing, I laugh at that when I like first got into coaching, and like I think everyone should work with kids at some point in their life.
Oh my God, yes.
And like even into like especially even high school athletes these days, because they've just been sitting all this time and they have no clue what a squat is or anything like that. I was working at a high school out here, and there was this freshman athlete, shortest little kid I've ever seen in my life. He was adorable. And
shorter than you?
Yes. Hard to beat.
I had to clarify. I had to put it on a scale.
Yeah, put it on a scale. Thanks.
Sorry.
No, it's all good. So I tell him to squat, and like instinctually he goes down, comes up on his toes, like heels aren't even touching the ground, like knees are way far over the toes because he can't even keep his heels on the ground. And I'm like, whoa, boy, we've got some work to do on just like a body weight squat here. And so I'm like cueing the shit out of him. Like, I can't even remember all the things I'm saying, but as a new coach too, like that's just kind of what happens. You're just barfing cues, like trying to make it look right. And I
Literally
learned in
anything.
that moment that like I don't remember exactly what it was, but I said something. I said a cue, and his body did exactly what I said, but it was not what I was wanting to see. It was not what I was wanting him to do. And I was like, blew my mind because I was like, that is what I said. Your body just literally did what I said to do, but that is not what I was wanting to see. And so then you kind of have to learn, okay, I can say that same cue, maybe even to someone else, and like the result is exactly what I wanted. But to this kid, I was racking my brain with a million different ways to say the same thing. And then once you said ultimately, it's like, all right, let's now look at it. Let me show you, because there was no mirrors in the weight room where I was at.
Yeah.
Let me show you what you're currently looking like. I'm going to try to imitate it as best as I can. And then now I'm going to have you like, here's how I want you to like slowly transition it. Like we're going to do this movement. And then here's what it's supposed to look like. But that cueing thing, oh my God, you can tell one person a cue that like in your mind works, and they do exactly that. And the result was not what you wanted at all.
And isn't it great? Like you stand there and you're like, well, shit.
Yeah.
Now what?
Like, you did it. Thanks.
You did it, right?
You're
And
worth it.
I agree with you wholeheartedly on this, Whitney. Like working with kids is such a challenge, but such a valuable learning opportunity because one, they don't have really all these ingrained patterns that we as adults have already put into our body. So in one sense, they're more moldable and malleable, and it makes it a little bit easier to work with because you'll see some quicker changes right away. You don't have to break through all those old patterns. But then, yes, the delivery it's got to be spot on because you can say something and it will, like you mentioned, it'll come out and it'll be expressed in a way that you don't expect, and then you're like, oh damn, now what? But then I look at it like this: it's like, okay, well, that's cool, all right. So you're able to do that, and then once again, what kind of constraints can we put around it to make it just a little bit different? Doesn't make it wrong, right? It's still, you still got from point A to point B, and that's really what it's about too. Is like how many options do you have to get from point A to point B, right? The more movement options that your body and your brain has to utilize, that's where you're now okay. Now we have more to work with from a performance standpoint because your body's more robust, but then also from an injury prevention standpoint, now we have a lot more to work with here. We are not overly stressing the same tissues over and over and over and over again, so you can distribute the load a little bit more. And that's a pet peeve of mine. I'm gonna get on a soapbox here for just a little bit.
Go for it.
Like this whole idea of mobility training, it's fucking stupid. It really is. Like it's because I could sit here and nitpick on the semantics of it because like if you look at the research, everybody thinks mobility is like flexibility, but they're totally different. Yeah, and you start to give me these definitions of like, well, flexibility is passive and mobility. Like, no, that's not actually true either. Yeah. And so if you look at the research, like mobility is defined in two ways. It's either the range of like the degrees of freedom that a joint has, right? So your knee has 2 degrees of freedom. It can bend and extend. It can rotate. Doesn't go side to side. That's AT or ACLs. But the hip, on the other hand, can flex, extend, it can internally, externally rotate, and it can abduct and adduct. It has 3 degrees of freedom, so therefore the hip is more mobile than the knee. Cool. I think we could all agree on that part. The other piece, though, is mobility, like how you get from point A to point B. If you look at mobility aids, like a walker or a cane, it's literally in the definition. It assists you in getting from point A to point B. Yeah. So that's the way that I like to define mobility, is more so around the movement options, how many options you have to get from point A to point B. And that ultimately is my job. How can I put you into enough situations, enough experiences to be able to develop more movement potential, more movement options, aka more mobility? And guess what? It really comes down to putting you into situations where I know you're going to fail, and then having you work there. Like with that kid, was it what you were looking for? Not necessarily.
He's now felt different movement patterns.
But it's one of his options. So you don't really want to take it away from him. Like, it's great to be able to squat down with your knees all the way out over your feet with your heels off the ground. It's fantastic. That's one way to do it. Yeah. But then now okay, well, what can I do that limits that? And that forces him into these other patterns. And we have him work there. And that's really how you express it, because there are no mobility exercises. There are no stability exercises. Your mobility and your ability to control your joints is really just a byproduct of your training. You're doing it right.
I would agree. Yeah, I had a question that had like popped up in my mind, and
Yeah.
you literally answered it as the question came up, because I was
We're on
gonna
the same
say,
wavelength.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Because I was gonna ask, like, as kind of I would call like a movement library, right? Like you
Mhm.
want to expose yourselves to as many movements as you can, so that you have a greater option of movements to choose from in any given scenario. So my question was like, for a sport like shooting that is very specific, like there's not a lot of movements that go on in a shooting sport. Like, would you suggest being very specific at this movement pattern that they need, or exposing them to a wider variety of movements? So, like you said, they have more options to choose from when the time comes.
The answer is yes to all of
Yes,
that.
every single thing.
Because there's two different ends of the spectrum here, or two sides of the coin, however you really want to look at it. Because we are all uniquely different in the way that we're designed, we are going, specifically for shooting, we are going to move that gun just a little bit differently. Okay. And that's fine. That's good. Right. But once again, is there a more efficient way for your body to do it? And I would argue yes. Right. And it just depends where you're at on like a training spectrum as well. Like somebody who doesn't have any history of training, you give them any type of novel stimulus, it's going to make their body more robust. It doesn't matter what I give them, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Now, you never really want to, remove them from what they're doing if they're doing it very well, unless you look at it from two different perspectives, which are always my arguments for this. One being like, if you're performing really well at it, that's great, but how long can you do it for? Like, for me, if I watch somebody lock out their knees and move that shotgun with skeeter trap by just moving their low back and their hands, like their arms, you can get away with that for a little while, but it's just a matter of time until you break down. And we know that's going to happen. So then it comes down to the choice. And I always give the athlete the choice. Like, do you want to start working on this now? Yes or no? Right? Because you have to be into it. Like, you have to be bought into it for it to be effective, number one. And just understand that you may actually experience performance detriment during the process because you're changing your body.
Yeah.
But this is your choice, right? And
is it often that people say no?
I like to think that I'm very convincing, but yeah, people do say no because they have to. You have to meet them where they're at, right? If they're not ready for it, they're not ready for it. Now, I will say this: the majority of the time they do come back months, years later, and like, okay, I'm ready to work on this now. And you often have to ask the question of like, okay, what happened? And what it usually comes down to the other thing I was going to talk about, right? Is you either start to hurt, like you experience chronic pain, or you're hurt, like you injure yourself, or you reach a plateau in your performance and you can't break through. And those are the two reasons why people always come back, right there. There's this one girl actually who's flying out to work with us in Texas next week, where last November, same thing, took her a few months to get to me, right? Where she knew she wanted to, but wasn't quite ready. And we overhauled everything. Like, we changed her stock on the shotgun. We changed her stance on the range. We changed the way that she was training. We changed the way that she moved the gun. And that was a lot. Okay. And there was a lot in like a 4-month time period, but she was ready for it and she committed and went full bore right into it, which is what you need to do. Right. And then, so she ended up having the best year of her career now as a shooting athlete. She's the reigning world champion in female ski, which is awesome. Pretty fucking cool. And so now like we're gearing up to the Olympics, and she did it at the right time point, a little bit of an off season going into the full competition year. And now she's ingrained these patterns. She's into the training. Paris is probably going to be a pretty successful year for her next year.
Nice, that's awesome. I think I would even argue it, and sounds like maybe you would agree, the more specific the sport is or the movement is that you're doing, the more variety you need to have outside of that, right? Because then, your body just gets used to moving. Same with powerlifting, right? Like when I first started, it was squat, bench, deadlift, and that was all I did. And if you saw your girl try to do anything lateral, it wasn't happening. Like, I played sports growing up, but because I competed for like at 3-4 years into it, like I wasn't doing lateral movements anymore. And then as
And you
I
do lose it.
yeah, you very much do.
Yeah.
And so then once I started, like that was all throughout college, and then once I finished college and was like getting into coaching and all of that, and I'm like, oh, I need to be able to demonstrate these explosive movements, these lateral movements, these rotational movements, and I've not moved in these planes of motion in like 3 or 4 years, and developing that again
Yeah.
was really hard.
Yeah, no, it's difficult. If you don't use it, you lose it for sure. That's 100% true neurologically. And wait, first question for you. What sports did you play? Were you a soccer player?
I did soccer and volleyball, and I ran like
Yes.
track and cross country.
Volleyball? You had to be like a setter in the back or
I
something.
was a libero, so like back row only.
And there it is. I
I
had to ask
love
that
I
question.
miss volleyball so much. God,
Yeah, no, I used to play some sand volleyball in college too.
nice.
It was a lot of
Yeah,
fun. I always picture like Tom Cruise and Top Gun, like that. That's like always the image of sand volleyball that I have,
that's
even though
funny.
he's only like 5'5". Anyway, totally
My
lost
height.
my train of thought there. Variety is the key there too. If
Mhm.
you don't use it, you lose it. And so yeah, absolutely. But it just comes down to like what you're training for from a specificity standpoint. Like, and
Mhm.
here's the deal. I would argue that everything that you just described, like being able to rotate and move laterally, are pretty universal human movement patterns that we should all
I would say
be
so
able to
too.
do
Mhm.
to some extent,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And if not only from a joint health perspective,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And so you can go as deep down the rabbit hole as you want and ingrain those movement patterns for your sport specific skill, but you got to be able to work on the other stuff and at least keep those types of patterns in there so that your body
Mhm.
doesn't degrade so fast.
Yeah.
I look at it this way, like, calluses on our hands.
Mhm.
Okay. We all have them as strength coaches. Our athletes have them too. When you tear a callus, is it the callus's fault? No, it's the skin around it. That's
Mhm.
the fault. The stuff that hasn't been exposed to the stress or the load. And that's
Yeah.
what tears. Okay. So when all these crazy CrossFitters are doing multiples of butterfly
Mhm.
pull-ups, when their hands get torn to shit, it's not the callus's fault. It's the skin that hasn't been adapted to it, usually around here,
Mhm.
that tears. Okay, and so the same
Yeah.
thing happens internally inside the joints as well. If we only move our joints in very specific lines of pull, of tension and force and load, you're going to overstress and overload those very specific areas of the
Mhm.
joint, maybe it be the capsule of the joint, the surfaces of like the tibia and the femur inside the knee. I'll keep the knee example here, the meniscus. Like you see it all the
Mhm.
time. People tear the meniscus. It's because its force is being imparted on one very specific area of it. And you're not getting any rotation through the knee. Okay, so if you're constantly putting those same lines of pull and force on the joint, you're going to experience degradation over time. It's going to happen, right?
Mhm.
But it wasn't that area's fault. That was actually the strong point. It was just everything else around it that wasn't doing its job, right? So it's our job then, I think, as providers and strength coaches to be able to give our athletes more opportunities to get more exposure to those areas that aren't getting that force and load.
Yeah. Yeah, that, and I
That's
would
simple.
even argue like when kind of like you mentioned for someone who competes in powerlifting or like a
Mm-hmm.
very specific sport, like rotation, lateral movements, all that kind of stuff are stuff you do in everyday life. So if you're not even exposing yourself to those movements and training, like the more time that goes by, like we should, I think as coaches or whoever you're working with, the athletes, we should have their longevity in mind, right? Not just,
Mm-hmm.
yes, we
Yeah.
might want them to be really good at their sport or whatever it is that they're doing in this moment right now, but keep in mind that like they want to live a long life after this too, or they might get injured
Yes.
tomorrow and they might not be able to do the sport anymore. And so if we're not keeping the longevity aspect in mind, like we're doing them a huge disservice.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why, like my company, Rooted in Movement,
Mhm.
our company is a human performance company that focuses on holistic health and movement across the lifespan. It is about the
Mhm.
longevity side of things and
Yeah.
the vitality component of it. How long can you perform sport that you like to perform, right? Number one, or
Mhm.
how long can you do the things that you love to do? Hopefully, you can do it into your 80s and 90s. That's the goal.
Yeah,
Like
that'd be legit.
I look at myself now, and like I always give the example of I'm actually in better shape and I feel better in my 30s than I did in my 20s because I'm continually growing, learning, and evolving in my
Mhm.
understanding of what makes me feel
Mhm.
good and how to move my body in the most appropriate way for me. Right. So I always see that now compounding,
Words.
compounding. Yeah, words are tough some days. Compounding like into my 40s. Like I want to
Yeah.
feel better in my 40s ended in my 30s, feel better in my 50s ended in my 40s,
Mhm.
and kind of use that as my metric moving forward. I think that should be a goal for all of us.
Yeah, I think that's so funny that you say that because I've actually heard a number of other coaches, friends, whatever, who have said the exact same. And I think one of those, like, the more you know, like, you don't know better, or you don't do better until you know better.
Mm-hmm.
And so over time, hopefully, you're putting yourself around people and in scenarios that you're learning more, you're growing, you're becoming smarter about certain things.
Yeah,
And yeah, I've heard so many people be like, God, I feel so much better now in my 30s than I did in my 20s. And because they know more, because they know better
absolutely.
now. They're not doing stupid things anymore. They know, yeah, I do want to live a long, healthy life. And so I'm going to change up my training. I'm not going to beat myself to shit every time. While that is fun every now and then, I'm not going to do it all the time, every single workout like I used to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And then it always comes down to the psychological component. Like, why did we do those things when we were
Yeah.
younger?
Yeah.
I can't speak for you. I can speak for myself though. It's all about impressing girls. Like, I mean, that's
Yes.
realistically as a college kid, that's all the reason. The only reason why you were going to the gym, right, was to build up your chest and your back and to look good in a bathing suit.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
come on.
I think
Yeah.
everyone, to some degree, if you're involved, especially if you do it long enough, if you're involved in weight training, there's some ego aspect of it. Like, I'm not as strong as
Always.
when I used to be when I competed powerlifting. And I even like, I was 115 pounds and I could deadlift over 300 pounds. I cannot do
Damn.
that anymore. And I weigh more than that. Like, just
Yeah.
don't, I don't weigh that way anymore. Right.
Yeah.
Um, but I say that to say, like, that training, like, I beat myself to shit when I was doing that. And like, that kind of built my ego though, because of how strong I was. And sometimes, just sometimes, when I want to go deadlift, I want to see, like, how much can I do? And it hurts every time. But there's that little
Well,
bit of ego that's like, let's just see what's there.
yes. And I think that little bit of ego is healthy. We
For
need
sure.
that.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
a drive. It's a dopamine hit. It
it
feels
is.
good.
Absolutely.
It's just learning how to work with it
Yeah.
better than trying to, fully just surrender to it all the time. Like, no, this is a relationship. You're not going to take control.
Yeah. 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 And
Yeah.
every now and then it's okay. But if I push myself too far, I regret it the
Yeah.
next day every single time.
And there's some great awareness there as well, right?
For sure.
So,
Yeah. What is this pain? Yeah, maybe that
yeah.
was it worth
Oh,
it? Was it not?
yeah.
Yeah.
Gonna make a better
Gonna
decision
do
next
that
time.
one. Yeah. We're coming up on an hour here. Matt, I feel like we could literally talk forever.
We
So
could.
maybe
We
we
could.
have another one because so many other things I wanted to ask you about. Like you said, you're a hunter, you're involved in hunting.
Mhm.
And one thing that I don't know if you've kept up with a couple of the recent ones, but I know you're big into like mental health as well. And that has kind of like slowly as I've done this podcast become something that like I don't know. It's really important to me, and I've been able to
Yeah.
incorporate it into like almost every episode so far. So that just means we have to do another one sometime.
I am totally game for that.
Yeah,
This has been an absolute pleasure.
yeah, it's been awesome. Thank
Yeah.
you so much. So I
Yeah.
do end every episode with
Okay.
asking everyone, "What does wild strength mean to you?" And you can really take that how you want to. You can make it a psychological answer, like with mental health. You can say, "Wild strength to me is." Putting down a big buck and carrying it out, or wild strength to me is like hitting something in the weight room, whatever that looks like to you. But I do,
Mhm.
yeah, end all of them with that question. So I
I,
ask you, what does it mean to you?
I love that question. And the first thing that comes to mind is to be useful, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think, one of the reasons why I continue to do what I do for my own training is to be useful, like to be able, like you mentioned, to go out and hunt and to be able to drag a deer 3 miles,
Mm-hmm.
then be able to do it myself as well,
Yeah.
or to be useful for other people,
Mm-hmm.
like when they're in need, like to be able to go and lift something into the back of a truck for them, or God forbid something falls on somebody, but lift it off. Like I want to be able to help,
Yeah.
right? And I think that's a great metric though for just
Mm-hmm.
not just men in society either, but like we should be able to be involved in a situation like that and be able to lend a hand, right? And
Mm-hmm.
not have to worry about hurting our backs or not have to like question ourselves when we go and do it. It's always comes back to the old Boy Scout mentality for me of being prepared, right? And
Yeah.
so how much can I physically and mentally be prepared for? And I think that's a great definition for wild strength, because you can put yourself in some pretty wild scenarios and situations, and are you going to be able to come out of that unscathed and actually be useful in that scenario as well?
Yeah, I would agree. And I think I've kind of like had this conversation with a couple of friends before, like even outside of the podcast, is like the not only if you're in the weight room are you like physically getting stronger, but like it boosts
Mm-hmm.
your confidence
Confidence is
and
huge.
like the ability to, like you said, be useful for something to happen. And like we'll use a scenario like lifting something off of somebody if it falls on them. Like I want to be
Mm-hmm.
able to see that and have the confidence to go in and be like, I can help this person
Yes.
versus seeing it happen and being like, oh shit,
And
what do I
hesitate
do?
and
Like I
freeze.
can't help
Yeah.
them. I'm useless. Like
Yeah, exactly.
it does you no
I
good.
think that's great.
Well, thank you so much, Matt. And I've enjoyed having you on here.